A retired Navy SEAL returned home during the harshest winter in years and saw an old woman and her German shepherd being thrown out of a restaurant. When she turned around, Mason froze. The woman was his own mother, Nell, weak, hungry, and dressed in worn-out clothes. Briar, the aging black and gold German shepherd, recognized Mason instantly and pressed against him as if he had been waiting years for this moment. At home, Mason found an empty refrigerator, rationed medicine, unpaid bills, and learned Nell believed he had stopped sending money 3 years ago. But Mason had never missed a payment, and the first clues revealed someone close to the family had been stealing more than money. Soon, hidden records and suspicious property papers exposed a plan that threatened both Nell's home and the years Mason could never get back. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and please like this video and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, faith, and second chances. Winter had buried Aurora pines beneath a kind of beauty that could kill a careless man. The northern Maine town lay bright beneath a hard blue sky, its steep roofs carrying thick white caps of snow, its white pines standing motionless along the frozen shore of Lake Bellwether. Sunlight flashed across the ice so fiercely that Mason Rourke had to narrow his eyes behind the windshield. At 55, Mason still carried himself with the controlled economy of the Navy SEAL he had once been. He stood 6'1", broad through the shoulders, his body solid rather than bulky, the build of a man who might spend hours behind a desk now, but still trained before dawn because discipline had long ago become more habit than choice. His clean-shaven face was sharply American and masculine, with angular cheekbones, a strong chin, a straight nose, and deep blue-gray eyes that seemed to hold more sadness than they ever explained. Ash-brown hair, silvering heavily at the temples, was kept in a neat undercut. Even after days of travel, he looked orderly. He wore the same fitted, long-sleeved green camouflage uniform he preferred when traveling home, matching tactical trousers tucked cleanly over black combat boots. It was not an attempt to impress anyone. Mason had simply spent too many years inside uniforms to feel entirely himself without one. He had not told his mother he was coming. That was the small pleasure he had allowed himself. In the back of the rented SUV sat a single duffel bag and a narrow gift box containing a dark blue wool scarf. Eleanor Rourke had admired one just like it years ago in a shop window, then declared that no sensible woman should pay that much money for something whose only job was to strangle the cold politely. Mason had remembered. He remembered far too many things when it came to his mother. What he did not know was how much he had forgotten to notice. Before heading toward Pineglass House, he turned onto Main Street. Copper Lantern Grill still stood on the corner beneath its old brass sign, its windows glowing amber against the snow. When Mason was a boy, Nell had brought him there every birthday for cinnamon pancakes. Later, when he began deploying overseas, she had mailed him handwritten descriptions of whatever dessert she had eaten in his absence, as though pie were military intelligence. He smiled at the memory. Then he noticed the woman outside the restaurant. She stood close to the door, small enough that the German shepherd beside her nearly reached her hip. Her ash-gray wool coat was faded pale at the elbows. A brown scarf had been wrapped twice around her narrow neck. Her trousers were old, and the sole of one winter boot had been repaired with gray tape. The dog was magnificent despite his age. A male German shepherd, perhaps 8 years old, with a deep chest and strong legs, his winter coat a rich wheat gold beneath a broad black saddle that darkened his back and shoulders. His muzzle was mostly black, touched by the faintest silver around the chin. 2 upright ears tracked every sound along the street, while amber eyes remained fixed on the man standing in the doorway. Hank Dillard owned Copper Lantern Grill. Mason remembered the name before he remembered the face. Hank was 49 now, short and heavy through the middle, with a broad round face reddened by years of kitchen heat. His light brown hair had thinned noticeably on top and was combed sideways in a losing negotiation with age. He was clean-shaven, his small brown eyes habitually narrowed as though the world had personally overcharged him for something. A red and black flannel shirt showed beneath a stained cream canvas apron. He had never been an evil man. He had simply spent enough years believing inconvenience justified cruelty. "I said the dog stays out," Hank snapped. The old woman held a cloth purse close to her chest. "He will," she said quietly. "I only wanted 2 soups to take home." Her voice did something strange to Mason. He slowed. Hank shook his head. "People are eating in here." "I know. A couple customers complained about the smell." The woman lowered her eyes. Mason stopped walking. "Wood smoke," she explained. "Our stove smokes a little when the wind turns." Hank sighed loudly enough for the people inside to hear. "It isn't just that. You come in with that old coat, the dog, mud on your boots. It makes people uncomfortable." The German shepherd shifted closer to the woman's leg. Not aggressive, protective. Several customers watched through the steamed glass. One man looked down at his plate. A woman raised her coffee mug. Nobody moved. The old woman swallowed. "I have money, Hank." "I didn't say you didn't." "That sounds very much like what you're saying." For an instant, something almost mischievous survived in her voice. Mason felt another tug of familiarity. Hank pushed the door partly closed. "Find somewhere else today, and if you bring the dog inside again, I'll call the sheriff. I'm tired of arguing about it." The woman turned. Mason saw her face. The world became silent. Not metaphorically. For one terrible heartbeat, Mason heard nothing. Not the idling truck behind him, not the faint restaurant music, not the winter wind moving powdered snow across Main Street. Her face had grown narrow. Her cheeks were hollow. Her skin looked pale against her white hair, which had been gathered into a simple low knot beneath a knitted cap. Deep lines ran around her mouth and the corners of her pale blue-gray eyes. But Mason knew those eyes. He had seen them over a fevered childhood bed, across graduation bleachers, at an airport gate when he left for training, in photographs carried through places his mother would never know existed. "Mom?" The cloth purse slipped from Eleanor Rourke's fingers. It landed softly in the snow. "Mason?" His name came out as scarcely more than breath. Then Briar moved. The German shepherd's head lifted sharply. His nostrils worked against the cold. For a moment the dog simply stared. Mason remembered a puppy with oversized paws sliding across his mother's kitchen floor. He remembered kneeling 6 years earlier before another deployment, rubbing behind Briar's ears and telling him, foolishly but sincerely, "Take care of her." Briar walked toward him. One step, then another, slowly, almost cautiously. Mason lowered himself to one knee. The old shepherd sniffed his extended hand, then his wrist, then the sleeve of the green camouflage shirt. Briar froze. A tremor ran through the dog's body. And then he stepped forward and pressed his forehead hard against Mason's chest. A thin sound escaped him. Not a bark, not quite a whine. Something smaller, something that sounded painfully close to relief. Mason's hand settled over Briar's neck. "Hey, old boy." His voice broke. Briar pushed harder against him. 6 years had passed. The dog remembered. Re-hook, then Briar suddenly pulled away. He turned toward Nell, touched his nose to her worn glove, then looked back at Mason. Once, twice. The gesture was so deliberate that Mason felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Briar walked back to Nell, leaned his entire shoulder against her fragile leg, and stared at Mason again. It was not the greeting that unsettled him. It was the question in those amber eyes. Where were you? And for the first time, Mason really looked at his mother. Not at the woman he remembered, at the woman standing before him now. Her coat was too thin. Her glove had been stitched at 3 fingers. The tape around her boot had begun peeling loose. She had lost weight, far too much weight. Something inside Mason shifted. Nell was already crying when he reached her. "Oh, honey." She touched his face with both hands as though confirming bone, warmth, reality. Mason hugged her carefully at first, then tighter. She felt frighteningly light. "I wanted to surprise you," he whispered. "Well," she said through tears, "you've always been terribly good at dramatic timing." A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Briar stood pressed against both of them. Behind them, Hank cleared his throat. Mason turned. The restaurant owner had lost some of his certainty. "I didn't know she was your mother." Mason's expression did not change. "That shouldn't matter." Hank glanced toward his customers. "There are health rules." "Then enforce the rule." "I was." "No." Mason's voice stayed calm. You were humiliating her. Hank's face reddened. That dog can't be inside. My mother already agreed the dog would wait outside. She smelled like smoke. Mason looked at Nell's worn coat, then back at Hank. So sell her the soup at the door. Nobody spoke. Mason did not raise his voice. Years earlier, he might have mistaken anger for strength. Age had taught him that true control often sounded quieter. Rules can protect a business, he said. They don't require you to take someone's dignity with them. Hank looked away first. Nell touched Mason's sleeve. Come on, I don't want trouble. Mason looked at her. I know. That answer made her close her eyes briefly. He remembered how often she had said those words when he was young. I don't want trouble, usually just before solving someone else's. Mason refused to buy from Copper Lantern. Instead, he drove Nell to a small market 2 blocks away and filled a cart. Soup, bread, eggs, chicken, oatmeal, tea, vegetables, batteries, 2 bundles of kiln-dried firewood, and a large bag of dog food. Nell protested through half of it. You're buying enough for an expedition. I've planned smaller expeditions. You always were impossible. So I've been told. Briar sat beside the cart with solemn approval. Mason bought dog treats at the register and offered one. Briar took it gently. Then, instead of swallowing it, the shepherd carried it to Nell and dropped it beside her boot. Mason watched. Nell broke the treat in half. Only then did Briar eat. Something tightened under Mason's ribs. On the drive to Pine Glass House, he began seeing more. Nell kept her hands hidden inside her sleeves. Her gloves were thinner than he had realized. When the heater blew strongly, she closed her eyes with quiet pleasure. A person accustomed to warmth did not react like that. Pine Glass House stood at the edge of the white pine woods overlooking the frozen lake. Mason had spent most of his childhood there. The house was smaller than memory had preserved it. The cedar siding had faded silver. Snow bowed one section of the porch railing. Clear plastic covered 2 windows from the inside. Still, everything was clean. The porch had been swept. A little wooden bird his father carved decades earlier still sat beneath the eave. Inside, Mason stopped. Only the living room was warm. A heavy blanket hung across the hallway to keep heat from escaping into the rest of the house. The kitchen was spotless. The refrigerator was nearly empty. 4 eggs, half a jar of mustard, milk, a small bowl of potatoes, 3 containers of leftovers. Beside the sink sat Nell's medications. Mason picked up 1 bottle. The prescription had been stretched much longer than intended. On the table lay unopened utility bills and a property tax notice. He stared at them. Nell began unpacking groceries behind him. Mom, she stopped. How long has it been like this? Like what? He turned. She tried to smile. That smile hurt more than an answer. Mason pulled out a chair. The money. Her expression changed. What money? The money I send you every month. Nell stared at him. For several seconds, genuine confusion replaced embarrassment. Mason? I've been sending it. Her face slowly emptied of color. No. Yes. No, honey. She shook her head. You stopped. When? Nell gripped the edge of the table. Almost 3 years ago. Mason took out his phone. His thumb moved across the banking application. There it was. Month after month. Automatic transfers. The latest had cleared less than 3 weeks earlier. He turned the screen toward her. Nell sat down. Briar came immediately and placed his head beneath her hand. Neither mother nor son spoke for a long time. Outside, twilight descended over Aurora Pines, turning the snow pale blue beneath the pines. Mason sat across from the woman who had raised him. Briar lay between them like a living bridge. For years, Mason had believed money was reaching home. For years, Nell had believed her son could no longer afford to send it. And somewhere between those 2 truths stood a lie large enough to steal years from both of them. Morning came pale and brittle over Pine Glass House. The storm clouds had moved east during the night, leaving Aurora Pines beneath a sky so clear that every branch beyond the kitchen window seemed sharpened against the blue. Sunlight poured across the frozen shoulder of Lake Bellwether, turning the snow almost painfully bright. Mason Rourke had been awake before dawn. Old habits had pulled him from sleep at 4:47 without an alarm. Normally, he would have used the hour to run, stretch, or work through the disciplined routine his body had obeyed for decades. Instead, he sat alone at his mother's kitchen table. His phone lay beside a legal pad. 3 years of transfers stared back at him. Every month, the same automatic payment had left his primary account. Every month, Mason had assumed the money had reached the woman sleeping 20 feet away. It was strange how failure looked on a bank statement. No smoke, no blood, no broken glass, only numbers lined up politely beneath dates. Behind him came the soft click of claws. Briar entered the kitchen, his black and gold coat catching the weak morning light. The 8-year-old German shepherd paused beside Mason, amber eyes inspecting him with the solemn attention of an animal who had spent years learning the moods of one lonely household. Mason scratched behind his ear. "You don't sleep much either?" Briar sat. Mason almost smiled. "Good talk." At 7, Nell appeared wrapped in her old ash-gray coat over a beige sweater, though they were inside. Mason noticed that immediately. He said nothing about it. He had already turned the thermostat higher. Nell looked at the legal pad and stopped. "You're investigating me." "I'm investigating everyone." "Comforting." Mason looked up. "Start at the beginning." Nell made tea before answering. It was something she had always done when a conversation threatened to become painful. As a child, Mason had learned that the appearance of the blue kettle meant somebody was about to receive either wisdom or a lecture, often both. She sat across from him. The money didn't disappear all at once. Mason waited. At first it was normal, then it became less regular. A payment would come late, then half of what I expected. "You never called me?" "I did." Mason frowned. Nell folded both hands around her mug. "Not every time, but I asked." "What did I say?" Her eyes shifted. "You said you were having trouble." "I never said that." "I know that now." The answer came quietly. That hurt more. Nell explained that messages had begun arriving from numbers she associated with Mason's overseas work and from an email address similar enough to one he had previously used that she never questioned it. The messages were careful, never dramatic. That made them believable. They said his pay had been delayed, then that he was handling legal expenses. Later, they warned that his assignment had entered a sensitive period and unnecessary direct calls could create problems. Nell had been the mother of a serviceman for decades. She understood silence too well. That knowledge had been used against her. "I thought protecting you meant not asking questions," she said. Mason stared at the steam rising from his coffee. "And I thought protecting you meant sending money." Neither looked at the other for several seconds. There were kinds of guilt that demanded confession. This one simply sat between them. Mason searched his own archived messages. Then he found the emails. One from 2 winters earlier read as though Nell had written it herself. "Don't worry about me, I have enough. Please stop calling so late. You need sleep more than I need company." His jaw tightened. "I remember this." Nell leaned closer. "I never wrote that." Another message thanked him for a Christmas delivery Nell had never received. Another told him her doctor wanted less stress and fewer late calls. That was why Mason had begun calling less often. Not stopped. Never stopped completely. But the calls became shorter, more carefully timed. Usually Nell sat in the same corner of the living room where the camera showed a clean wall, a lamp, and the quilt she had owned for years. Mason remembered seeing her in sweaters. He had never realized she wore them because the rest of the house was barely heated. Memory became cruel when given new information. At 10 that morning, Dr. Ruth Calder arrived. Ruth was 64 and barely 5'4", a compact woman with a gently rounded build and the brisk movement of someone who had spent 40 years walking hospital corridors faster than everyone else. Her warm brown face was framed by short salt and pepper curls, and fine laugh lines gathered around dark, observant eyes. Reading glasses hung from a narrow chain over a burgundy sweater beneath her white medical coat. She had the rare personality of a person capable of comforting someone while simultaneously making disobedience feel medically irresponsible. Ruth stepped inside, saw Mason, and stopped. "Well." Mason stood. "Dr. Calder." You got older. So did you. Ruth narrowed her eyes. Deployment hasn't improved your manners. Nell smiled for the first time that morning. Ruth examined her at the kitchen table. Blood pressure, lungs, weight, medication schedule. Each answer made Mason more uncomfortable. When did she start spacing these? He asked, holding one prescription bottle. Ruth glanced at Nell. Several months ago. Nell immediately protested. I was being careful. You were improvising medicine because you couldn't afford the refill. I was stretching it. Ruth looked at Mason. That is elderly person vocabulary for doing something I specifically told her not to do. Nell muttered something about doctors developing tyranny after 60. Ruth ignored her. Mason asked the question he had been avoiding. Why didn't you contact me? Ruth's expression softened. Because your mother repeatedly told me you were financially strained. Nell stared down at her hands. Ruth continued gently. Whenever I suggested she call you, she said the same thing. What? Ruth hesitated, then answered. He's serving. I won't take money from my son while he's trying to survive his own life. Mason looked away. There had been explosions in his career that moved him less. Rehook Briar suddenly rose from beside Nell. He did not look toward the door. Instead, he crossed the hallway and stopped before a low cedar cabinet Mason remembered from childhood. The shepherd lowered his nose to the bottom drawer, sniffed once, then looked back toward Nell. Briar, she said, what are you doing? He touched his nose to the drawer again. Ruth gave a quiet laugh. Apparently, the medical consultation has expanded. But Mason was watching the dog. Briar did not scratch. He did not become excited. He simply waited. Nell sighed and walked over. You're becoming extremely opinionated in your old age. She opened the drawer. Inside were folded table linens, 2 old winter scarves, sewing supplies, and a bundle of unopened envelopes pushed beneath everything else. Nell went still. Mason crossed the room. What are those? I don't know. She lifted them slowly. Several bore the bank's logo. One had Mason's name. Another had Nell's. The oldest postmark was nearly 3 years old. Mason felt the temperature of the room change despite the heater. The first letter concerned a change in mailing preference. The second confirmed a new online access authorization. The third warned of a login from a previously unrecognized device. The fourth asked Nell to contact the bank concerning account management changes. She never had. I never saw these. Mason looked at her. Who handled your mail? Nell did not answer immediately. Then she said a name Mason had carefully avoided all morning. Vanessa helped sometimes. His former wife's name landed heavily. Nell explained that after the divorce, Vanessa had continued coming by occasionally. She said Mason wanted someone local checking in. She brought groceries now and then, helped sort insurance letters, opened complicated envelopes. She told me these account notices were probably related to your deployments, Nell said. Mason's face became unreadable. Did I ever tell you I asked her to help? No. Did she say I did? Nell nodded. Mason did not curse. That frightened Nell more than if he had. He photographed each envelope without altering the papers, then called the bank's fraud department. The conversation lasted nearly 40 minutes. Mason confirmed his identity, explained the disputed activity, requested that all legacy third-party access be frozen, and asked the institution to preserve transaction and authorization histories. The representative refused to speculate. Mason respected that. By late afternoon, the case had been assigned to Aaron Pike. Aaron called from Portland. He was 43, with a measured voice and the dry patience of a man who spent his professional life listening to people insist that suspicious money had moved itself. During a video identification check, Mason saw a narrow, serious face beneath short black hair lightly threaded with silver. Aaron wore a pale blue shirt and charcoal tie beneath a navy wool coat, his brown eyes calm but almost aggressively attentive. He looked like a man who trusted documents more than charm. Mason liked that immediately. Aaron reviewed only enough information to understand the shape of the complaint. So you transferred funds into a household support account? Every month. And during your marriage, Vanessa Crowell had management authority? Yes. Was that authority formally revoked? Mason paused. I changed my personal credentials. That's not what I asked. No? Aaron nodded once. No judgment, which somehow felt worse. Then we don't assume theft yet. Mason's expression hardened. My mother didn't receive the money. I understand. Someone did. Probably. Probably? Aaron leaned closer to the camera. Mr. Rourke, suspicion is useful. Certainty before evidence isn't. Mason said nothing. Aaron continued. I'll trace the transfers, access history, routing changes, authorizations, and linked destinations. You do not contact anyone accusing them of financial fraud until we know what the records establish. Mason disliked being instructed. He disliked Aaron less for doing it anyway. Before ending the call, Aaron gave him one final piece of advice. Don't guess. A pause. Let the money tell the story. That evening, Pine Glass House felt different. Not safer. More awake. Nell went to bed early after Ruth made her promise, under threat of medical tyranny, to take her prescriptions correctly. Mason stretched out on the living room sofa. For a long time he stared at the ceiling. Years of decisions rearranged themselves inside his memory. The messages, the shortened calls, the excuses, the occasions when he had sensed distance but accepted it because acceptance required less courage than asking whether something was wrong. Near midnight, Briar entered. The shepherd looked toward Nell's bedroom, then at Mason. For years that dog had slept near her door. Tonight, Briar lowered himself beside the sofa instead. Mason reached down and rested a hand against the thick fur along his shoulder. You stayed. Briar's amber eyes lifted. Mason swallowed. When I didn't. The dog placed his head across Mason's boot. Outside, the road beyond Pine Glass House lay silver beneath the moon. Several hundred yards away, where the pines curved around a narrow turnout, a silver crossover sat with its lights off. Behind the windshield was a woman of 38 with a slim, carefully maintained figure and shoulder-length chestnut-brown hair falling smooth around a sharply elegant face. Vanessa Crowell had pale skin, high cheekbones, a narrow chin, and hazel-green eyes that had always been remarkably good at appearing warmer than the thoughts behind them. Her camel-colored wool coat remained buttoned despite the heater. She stared at Pine Glass House, at the downstairs lamp, at the unfamiliar vehicle in the drive, then at the silhouette of a tall man briefly crossing the living room window. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Mason was home, and whatever she had believed she still had time to manage had just begun moving without her permission. Vanessa Crowell arrived just after 9 the next morning. By then, sunlight had climbed above the white pines and flooded Pine Glass House with a cold, brilliant glow. Snow lay thick along the porch rail, and the frozen surface of Lake Bellwether beyond the trees looked like hammered silver beneath the winter sky. Mason heard the tires before he saw the car. Briar heard them first. The 8-year-old German shepherd lifted his head from the rug beside Nell's chair. His amber eyes sharpened. Both ears turned toward the front of the house. He did not bark. Mason noticed that. A moment later came 3 measured knocks. Nell looked toward the door. That'll probably be Vanessa. Mason's hand paused around his coffee mug. You were expecting her? No. That answer told him more than the knock had. When he opened the door, Vanessa stood beneath the porch light holding a paper bag of groceries in one hand and a cardboard bakery box in the other. At 38, Vanessa was still striking in the controlled, polished way Mason remembered. She was slender and about 5'6", with pale skin, high cheekbones, a narrow chin, and hazel-green eyes that could seem warm when she wanted them to. Her chestnut-brown hair fell straight to her shoulders, carefully styled despite the snow. A camel-colored wool coat reached her knees over a cream turtleneck and charcoal trousers, while dark brown ankle boots looked too expensive to have walked through much slush. Vanessa had always understood presentation. Even during their marriage, she could enter a room after an argument looking as though nothing disorderly had ever touched her life. For years, Mason had mistaken that composure for strength. Now he wondered how much of it had simply been practice. Mason. Her surprise lasted exactly long enough to seem convincing. Vanessa. She smiled. I heard you were home. Aurora Pines was a small town. That part required no explanation. She lifted the bags. I brought bread, some vitamins for Nell, chicken, a few things she likes." Behind Mason, Nell called warmly, "Don't leave the poor girl standing in the cold." Mason stepped aside. Vanessa entered. Briar rose immediately. The change in him was subtle. His back did not arch, his lips did not lift. No growl vibrated in his chest. He simply moved. The shepherd crossed the living room and stopped between Vanessa and Nell. Vanessa looked down. "Hello, Briar." She bent and extended one gloved hand. Briar's nose moved once. Then he stepped backward. Vanessa's smile faltered. "Still holding grudges, I see." Nell laughed softly. "Oh, he's particular about everything now. At his age, apparently everyone else is badly trained." Mason said nothing. Briar knew Vanessa. That was what interested him. This was not fear of a stranger. It was restraint around someone familiar. Vanessa placed the groceries on the kitchen counter and hugged Nell carefully. "You should have called me if you needed anything." Nell looked embarrassed. "I've managed." "I know you have." Vanessa squeezed her shoulder. "You shouldn't have to." The words sounded kind. Mason watched his mother's face soften beneath them. That was the difficult part. Whatever Vanessa had or had not done, Nell believed she had been helpful. Mason had spent enough years dealing with dangerous people to understand that the easiest villain to identify was the one who acted like one. Vanessa did not. She unpacked bread, checked Nell's vitamins, asked whether the furnace was behaving. She remembered which tea Nell preferred. There were moments when Mason almost hated himself for suspecting her. Almost. Then Vanessa glanced at him. "I heard there was some confusion about an account." Mason leaned against the counter. "Who told you?" "Nell mentioned money yesterday when I called." Nell looked apologetic. "I didn't think it was a secret." "It isn't." Vanessa nodded. "Good, because those old support accounts were always complicated." Mason watched her carefully. "How complicated?" "Your deployments, automatic payments, different authorizations. Remember? We had to change things constantly." "Did we?" Vanessa gave him a faint smile. "You weren't exactly managing household paperwork from the middle of the ocean." There had been a time that line would have irritated him. Now Mason let it pass. Vanessa continued, "Maybe the bank misrouted something. Or some of the payments were suspended after the divorce. You changed a lot of credentials." "Maybe." Her shoulders relaxed by a degree. "Exactly. Or maybe I remember it wrong. That happens too." "Maybe." Again. Mason offered her nothing else. Vanessa turned back toward Nell, and for a few minutes the conversation shifted to weather, groceries, and the brutal cold forecast for the week. Then she made her first mistake. "Have you still not decided about the house?" Nell's hand stopped over the bread bag. Mason looked at Vanessa. "What decision?" Silence. Only 2 seconds. "Enough." Vanessa recovered quickly. "Pine Glass House." "What about it?" "Nell has talked about selling." Mason turned toward his mother. Nell avoided his eyes. Vanessa spoke before Nell could. "The roof is aging. Taxes have gone up. She lives out here alone. It isn't unreasonable." "I didn't say it was." "No, but you look like you're interrogating me." "I'm drinking coffee." Vanessa's mouth tightened. Nell intervened. "Everett only mentioned there might be options." Mason looked back. Everett. Vanessa's husband. Mason had met him twice. Enough to remember polished shoes, expensive watches, and a handshake that seemed designed to establish ownership. Vanessa gathered her gloves from the counter. "I didn't come here to argue. I'm glad you're home, Mason. Truly." She kissed Nell's cheek. At the door, she looked back once. "We all want what's best for her." Mason answered quietly, "I'm sure we do." After the car disappeared down the road, the house remained strangely still. Mason did not question Nell immediately. He waited until she had poured fresh tea. Then he sat opposite her. "Tell me about the house." Nell stared into her cup. "Vanessa and Everett think I should sell." "Do you?" "No." The answer came quickly. That mattered. "They've brought papers?" "Once or twice." "What kind?" "I don't know exactly. Everett said they would let him speak to insurance people and repair companies for me. Something about taxes, too." Mason's jaw hardened. "You almost signed them?" Nell's face flushed. "Once." She looked ashamed. Mason reached across the table. "Mom, I'm not accusing you." "I know." "Then don't look guilty." Nell gave him a tired smile. "That may be harder than it sounds." She told him about the afternoon Everett had sat at the same kitchen table with papers arranged neatly before her. She had been tired. Her hands were shaking. Everett kept saying the documents were routine. Vanessa stood near the window telling her it would make everything easier. Briar had been asleep by the stove. Then Nell reached for the pen. Her breathing changed. Briar stood. The shepherd crossed the room, pressed his broad head beneath Nell's forearm, and pushed gently upward. The pen slipped from her fingers. "I told them we'd finish another day," Nell said. Mason looked down at Briar. The dog lay beside the table now, expression unreadable. "He didn't know what the papers were." "No. He knew you were scared." Nell looked at the dog for a long moment. "Maybe that's enough." Rehook. As if the memory itself had disturbed him, Briar suddenly got up. He walked past Mason, past Nell, straight to the side door. There he stopped. Not at the front entrance Vanessa had used that morning. At the narrower door leading toward the woodshed and backyard. Briar lowered his nose to the threshold, then looked toward Nell. She frowned. "What is it?" The dog touched the door with his muzzle. Once. Mason's attention sharpened. "Does Vanessa use that entrance?" Nell blinked. "Sometimes." "When?" "Oh, I don't know." She thought. Then her expression changed. "Mostly afternoons." "What afternoons?" "When I was resting." Mason did not speak. Nell's fingers tightened around the edge of her mug. "She said she didn't want to wake me by knocking at the front." Briar remained at the side door. Not mystical, not accusing, only remembering a route. But sometimes memory was more useful than suspicion. Mason called Deputy Claire Maddox before he did anything else. Claire arrived less than an hour later in a Brown County SUV dusted white around the wheel wells. She was 35, tall for a woman at roughly 5'8", with an athletic frame built more from long winter shifts than gym vanity. Her face was slightly square, with firm cheekbones and steady amber-brown eyes. Dark brown hair was pulled into a low ponytail beneath her winter uniform cap. She wore a dark brown deputy's jacket over her long-sleeved uniform, matching trousers, a duty belt, and black winter boots. Claire had grown up 2 towns east and had served in the county for 11 years. A domestic violence call early in her career, one she had initially dismissed as probably just an argument, had taught her a lesson she never forgot. Ordinary-looking situations could hide extraordinary harm. That mistake had made her careful. It had also made her suspicious of certainty. Mason explained everything. Claire listened without interruption. When he finished, she said, "You don't confront Everett." "I didn't say I would." "You thought it." Mason stared at her. Claire continued, "You don't enter anyone's property. You don't follow anyone. You don't access devices or accounts you aren't authorized to access. And you don't scare them into destroying evidence because you're angry." "I'm not angry." Claire glanced toward Nell, then back at him. "You're furious." Mason almost respected the accuracy. "You're in Aurora Pines," Claire said. "Not on a mission." "I know where I am." She studied him. "I'm not sure you do yet." Nell concealed a smile behind her tea. Claire asked about the missing documents. That was when Nell mentioned the shed. A small storage building stood behind Pine Glass House, partly buried by snow. Walter Rourke had once kept property records, tax receipts, tools, and insurance papers there in a weatherproof steel cabinet. They crossed the yard. Briar followed. At the shed, Nell stopped. "That's not my lock." A new brass padlock hung on the latch. Claire crouched to examine it. "You own the property?" "Yes." "You authorize us to open your shed?" "I do." Claire documented the lock before having it removed without unnecessarily damaging the door. Inside, cold air smelled of cedar, machine oil, and dust. Nothing dramatic waited for them. No hidden criminal ledger, no stack of stolen cash, only an old cabinet standing partly open. Nell crossed to it. Her hands began moving through folders. Insurance, old repairs, Walter's receipts. Then she stopped. My deed copy was here. Claire looked over. And the property tax records? Same folder. Gone. Several other papers had been disturbed but left behind. That distinction mattered. Someone had not randomly searched the shed. They had known what they wanted. Claire returned to her SUV and began checking publicly accessible county property records. 20 minutes later, she came back carrying a tablet. Her expression had changed. 6 months ago, a preliminary transfer package was prepared concerning this parcel. Nell stared at her. I never transferred anything. It wasn't completed. Who prepared it? Mason asked. Claire looked at him. Everett Crowell. The winter seemed suddenly quieter. Later, Mason stood alone near the edge of the yard. Briar came to his side. The old shepherd looked toward Pine Glass House, then toward the white road disappearing between the trees. Mason had once spent his life studying terrain for the slightest evidence of danger. A wrong shadow, a disturbed path, a door left open. He had always believed threats arrived from somewhere outside. Now the place he needed to protect was the house where he had learned to walk, and the people circling it had once been welcomed through the door. Aaron Pike called shortly after sunrise. Mason was standing at the kitchen counter, trying to make breakfast without waking Nell. The attempt had already failed twice. First, the old stove clicked louder than a rifle bolt. Then Briar appeared from the hallway and sat directly behind Mason with the silent patience of a creature who believed any man holding bacon required supervision. Mason's phone vibrated across the counter. Aaron's name appeared on the screen. He answered immediately. Rourke. Do you have somewhere private to talk? Something in Aaron's voice removed what little humor remained from the room. Mason stepped onto the back porch. Cold wrapped around him at once. His fitted green camouflage sleeves offered little protection against the northern Maine morning, but he barely noticed. Snow glittered beneath the first sunlight, and beyond the pines, Lake Bellwether was a sheet of pale blue ice. Aaron did not waste time. The transfers from your primary account are clean. I know. Listen first. Mason's jaw tightened. Aaron continued. Your money entered the household support account exactly as scheduled. No interruption, no failed months, no payment suspension after your divorce. Mason gripped the porch rail. Then where did it go? Somewhere very specific. Aaron explained the pattern. Small utility bills had continued to be paid. Electricity, occasional pharmacy charges, property tax installments, enough ordinary expenses to make the account appear active and legitimate. But the larger monthly balances had been divided, not taken in one obvious withdrawal, moved in smaller transfers, different amounts, different dates, all eventually converging on an entity called North Bell Services, LLC. Mason stared across the white yard. Who owns it? That's where it gets interesting. Aaron's voice became flatter. North Bell is connected through a registered business address and secondary banking relationship to Everett Crowell. For several seconds, Mason did not answer. Aaron continued. The first questionable transfers begin a few months after your separation from Vanessa. How much? Aaron gave him the cumulative number. Mason closed his eyes. It was not enough money to make a rich man famous. It was enough to keep an elderly woman warm for years, enough for medication, roof repairs, food, heating fuel. Every dollar transformed itself inside Mason's mind into something physical. A coat Nell had not bought, a doctor's visit delayed, a cold bedroom, a meal divided into tomorrow. Are you certain? I am certain about the transfers. Vanessa? I'm not giving you that conclusion yet. Mason opened his eyes. You know what this looks like. I know what records show. That's different. Aaron paused. Do not confront anyone. Mason almost laughed. It contained no humor. Aaron added, I'm serious. So am I. That's exactly why I'm saying it. The call ended with Aaron promising to forward the appropriate records through official channels to Claire. Mason remained outside. Cold seeped through his boots. He welcomed it. Anger was easier when the body had something else to fight. Behind the glass, Briar appeared. The German shepherd stood at the back door, black saddle dark against his wheat gold coat, amber eyes fixed on Mason. Not asking to come outside, watching. Mason finally went in. Nell was seated at the table. She had already understood from his face that the news was bad. "How much?" she asked. Mason sat down. He gave her the figure. Nell barely reacted. That surprised him. She looked at her hands instead, then asked, "So you never stopped sending it?" The question shattered him more efficiently than the number had. "No." Nell lifted her eyes. "Not even once?" "Not 1 month." Her mouth trembled. She turned her face away. Mason had seen his mother cry at funerals, at airports, once over a dog she had rescued from a roadside ditch when he was 12. This was different. She made almost no sound. "I thought," Nell whispered, "I thought you'd gotten tired of carrying me." Mason stared at her. "What?" "The messages. You were busy. Calls became shorter." "Because I thought you wanted them shorter." Nell covered her mouth. For 3 years, each had interpreted distance as the other's choice. That was the real theft. Money could be counted. Time could not. Christmas mornings when Mason had considered calling twice and decided not to pressure her. Winter nights when Nell had sat alone beside the stove, believing her son's life was already difficult enough. Birthdays reduced to careful messages. Fear hidden because each thought silence was kindness. Mason reached across the table. Nell took his hand. Neither apologized. An apology would have been too small. Briar came between their chairs and placed his chin across Nell's knee. For once, Mason did not resent the dog for knowing where he was needed before anyone else did. Later that morning, Mason cooked eggs. Badly. Nell studied the plate as though evaluating structural damage. "What did those eggs do to you?" Mason looked down. "They're cooked. They've been interrogated. They're eggs. They're building materials." Briar immediately sat closer. Mason pointed a fork at him. "You're not getting any." Briar's ears rose. Nell broke off a tiny piece. "Betrayal," Mason said. Nell smiled. "Apparently it runs in the family." The humor vanished almost as soon as it arrived, but for a few minutes, Pine Glass House sounded like a home again. By noon, the pressure outside began changing shape. A county housing inspector arrived after an anonymous complaint alleging unsafe living conditions. He was polite, professional. He found repairs that genuinely needed attention, but nothing requiring Nell to abandon the house immediately. An hour after he left, a real estate agent called asking whether Eleanor Rourke was ready to discuss the pending opportunity. Nell hung up without answering. Then Mason found 3 bright survey stakes near the northern edge of the property. Claire arrived shortly afterward. She crouched beside one marker, studying the placement. "Did anyone authorize surveying?" "No," Nell said. Claire photographed each stake. "Don't remove them yet." Mason looked at her. "Why?" "Because patterns matter." She stood. One complaint can be coincidence. One sales call can be aggressive business. One boundary marker can be a mistake. Her amber-brown eyes moved toward the house. "But several events, close together, after a failed transfer package?" Mason finished the thought. "Pressure." Claire nodded. "Maybe." She was still careful with that word. Maybe. Mason was beginning to understand why. Re-hook. That afternoon, Nell stood in the kitchen folding dish towels while Mason tightened a loose cabinet hinge. Briar had been sleeping near the staircase. Without warning, the shepherd woke. His head lifted, not toward a sound, toward Nell. She had gone completely still. In her hands was an old red dish towel with a faded embroidered pine tree. Briar crossed the room and pressed his nose against it. Nell's face changed. "What is it?" Mason asked. She swallowed. "Vanessa gave me that towel." Mason waited. Nell rubbed the cloth between her fingers. "Not the towel, the basket." "What basket?" "The Christmas basket 2 years ago. Food, soap, a new phone." Briar kept his nose against the cloth, then turned toward the staircase. The dog walked to the small wooden cabinet beside it and sniffed along the wall. Mason did not immediately follow. He remembered Claire's warning, no assumptions. But Nell stared at Briar as though an old memory had just knocked from inside her skull. "Vanessa said the first phone stopped working." "What first phone?" "The one she gave me before Christmas." "What happened to it?" "I don't know." Briar moved behind the cabinet, then stopped. Sometimes the past did not return as a revelation. Sometimes it returned as a dog refusing to leave one corner of a room. Before moving the cabinet, Mason called Claire. She approved looking behind furniture inside Nell's own home, but instructed him not to manipulate any device if one appeared. The cabinet scraped softly over the floor. Behind it was a narrow gap in the old wall paneling. Inside lay a phone, small, black, dust-covered. Nell recognized it immediately. That's it. Mason crouched but did not touch it. Claire arrived 25 minutes later. She photographed the phone in place, documented where it had been found, then collected it for proper handling. While the device moved into evidence, Mason pursued another part of the timeline. He drove with Claire to see Marjorie Bell. Everyone called her Marge. The 67-year-old retired postal clerk lived in a cheerful yellow house 2 streets from the old post office. She was short, slightly round through the middle, with rosy winter cheeks, bright blue eyes, and a neat silver-gray bob tucked behind both ears. She wore a navy puffer coat over a wine-red sweater, despite being indoors because, as she explained, heat costs money and sweaters already exist. Marge possessed the dangerous memory of someone who had spent 35 years sorting everybody else's names. She remembered Vanessa. Pretty woman, camel coat, always smelled expensive. Claire almost smiled. Marge continued. She used to pick up things for Nell. Did Nell authorize that? Claire asked. At first, yes. At least I was told so. Marge frowned. Then Vanessa started asking that certain bank mail be redirected to a box. Whose box? I don't remember the number without records. Why did you allow it? There were forms. Marge looked uncomfortable. Vanessa said Nell's eyesight was failing and she was helping manage paperwork. I thought I was helping too. Mason recognized the expression. Shame arriving after kindness had been exploited. You couldn't know, he said. Marge looked at him sharply. That's what people say when they want you to stop feeling guilty. Then her face softened. But thank you. The recovered phone took time, not hours. Days were not skipped inside the narrative, but the investigation progressed through controlled examination rather than instant television magic. When Claire finally returned with the preliminary findings available to investigators, she brought no dramatic smile. That worried Mason more. There were photographs of Nell's identification documents, photographs of property paperwork, saved account credentials, archived messages. Some were between Vanessa and Everett. One message was short enough to be almost meaningless alone. Claire read it twice. If she signs the POA, the land is done. POA? Nell asked. Power of attorney, Claire said. Nell's face paled. There was more. A file stored on the device contained a development map. At the top, Bellwether Crown Lodge, preliminary access plan. Mason leaned closer. Lake Bellwether stretched across the digital map. The proposed lodge site sat beyond the northern woods. A marked access corridor ran from the county road toward the lake, straight across the edge of Pine Glass property. Claire enlarged the image. Without Nell's land, the route became longer, more expensive, and complicated by terrain. With it, the project had a clean approach. Mason finally understood why Everett cared about an aging wooden house owned by a 72-year-old woman. He did not care about the house. He cared about what stood underneath it. Nell stared at the map. I thought Vanessa wanted the money. Mason looked at the transfer records on the table, then at the property plan. She did. Claire's eyes remained on the screen. And Everett wanted something bigger. Briar lay against Nell's chair. His amber eyes were open. The house had once seemed lonely because Mason was gone. Now he understood loneliness itself had been useful to someone. Vanessa needed Nell to believe Mason had stopped helping. Everett needed Nell to believe selling was inevitable. Money weakened her. Isolation made her easier to persuade. And Pine Glass House, the place Mason had always thought of as simply home, had become valuable precisely because 2 people believed its owner had no one left to stand beside her. Mason rested both hands on the kitchen table. He did not promise revenge. He did not threaten anyone. He looked at his mother, then at Briar, then at the map. The truth was finally beginning to acquire a shape, and that shape had been built around one assumption, that Eleanor Rourke was alone. They had been wrong. The cold deepened over Aurora Pines in a way people could feel before the thermometer confirmed it. By noon, the sky had turned the pale metallic gray that northern towns recognized as warning. Wind moved low across Lake Bellwether, lifting dry snow into thin white veils that crossed the road and vanished against the pines. Inside Pine Glass House, Mason stood near the kitchen window with both hands braced against the counter. Claire Maddox sat at the table with a legal pad. Aaron Pike listened through speakerphone. They had the money trail. They had the old phone. They had the POA message. They had the preliminary lodge map. They had the unfinished transfer package tied to Everett Crowell. What they did not yet have was enough to prove precisely how far Vanessa and Everett had intended to go. Mason understood that intellectually. Emotionally, he had reached the end of patience 3 discoveries ago. "Then let me talk to him," he said. Claire looked up. "No. I didn't say threaten him. You don't have to." Mason's expression hardened. Claire did not flinch. Aaron's dry voice came through the phone. "For what it's worth, I also vote no. No one asked you. That's rarely stopped me." Nell, seated near the stove with Briar at her feet, gave the faintest smile. Mason exhaled through his nose. Claire leaned back. "Do you want Everett to know exactly what we have?" "No." "Do you want Vanessa to know her old phone is being examined?" "No." "Do you want either of them frightened enough to start destroying records?" Mason said nothing. Claire folded her arms. "So ask yourself a better question." He looked at her. "Do you want him to know he's being investigated, or do you want him to keep making mistakes?" That landed. Mason turned back toward the window. Years in special operations had taught him the value of patience, but patience on behalf of strangers was easier. This was his mother. That changed the mathematics. Claire continued, "We do not manufacture a crime. We do not stage anything illegal. We do not pressure them into saying something they weren't already prepared to say." Nell spoke from the chair. "So we let them believe I'm still confused." Mason turned. "No." Nell raised one eyebrow. That expression had disciplined him more effectively than rank ever had. "Mason." "Mom, you've already been through enough. And I am still sitting here. That's not the point." "It is exactly the point." Briar lifted his head at the change in their voices. Nell rested one hand on his black and gold neck. "For years, everyone made decisions around me. What I should know, what I shouldn't know, what I could afford. Whether I should sell my house." Her pale blue-gray eyes fixed on Mason. "You spent your life protecting people. Don't turn me into someone who isn't allowed to protect herself." Mason had no answer to that. He hated how much she sounded like him. Perhaps worse, she sounded like herself before poverty had taught her to apologize for taking up space. The plan remained simple. Mason genuinely had post-service administrative business that could have required travel. Word was allowed to circulate naturally that he might be away from Pine Glass House for several days. No false documents, no elaborate trap, no impersonation. He simply made himself scarce. In reality, Mason stayed at a modest cabin owned by an old service acquaintance 6 miles outside town, close enough to return quickly if Nell needed him. Claire knew exactly where he was. Nell had her phone. And Pine Glass House already had lawful security cameras in common areas and at exterior doors, installed with Nell's full consent after the earlier incidents. 2 days later, Vanessa called. She asked whether Mason had left. Nell answered carefully. He had things to handle. That was true. Vanessa arrived the following afternoon. This time she was not alone. Everett Crowell stepped from the passenger side of the silver crossover carrying a leather document case. He was 45, around 6 feet tall, with a firm but slightly softened build that suggested good restaurants more than hard labor. His face was long and clean-shaven, handsome in a polished, forgettable way, with a squared chin, thin lips, and gray eyes that rarely seemed to rest on a person without also measuring what they owned. Dark brown hair, lightly silvered at the temples, was combed into a precise side part. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a black turtleneck, tailored gray trousers, black leather gloves, and polished boots that looked absurdly untouched by salt. Everett had once built a reputation selling expensive lake properties to people who wanted privacy without understanding solitude. A licensing dispute in another state had made him more careful, not more honest. Since then, he had learned to speak softly enough that pressure could pass for expertise. Vanessa entered first. Everett followed. Briar stood before either of them reached the kitchen. He positioned himself beside Nell's chair, not in front of the door, not blocking anyone, simply close. Vanessa looked down at him. He's getting protective. Nell stroked Briar's shoulder. He's getting old. Everett smiled. Old animals and old houses both become expensive eventually. The smile remained. The room did not. Nell gestured toward the table. What did you bring? Everett opened the leather case. Nothing alarming. He placed several documents neatly in front of her. Authorization forms, repair coordination, insurance communication, tax assistance. Nell adjusted her reading glasses. They have a lot of pages for something not alarming. Everett gave a small laugh. That's law for you. Vanessa sat beside Nell. Mason won't always be here. Nell did not react. Vanessa continued. He has his own life, his own obligations. Everett tapped one document. This simply lets us handle practical matters if something comes up. Nell turned one page. Why would you need authority over property decisions? Everett paused. Limited authority. For what? Contractors, assessments, negotiations if necessary. What negotiations? Vanessa leaned forward. Nell, we've talked about this. Have we? A flicker of irritation crossed Vanessa's face, then vanished. About the house. Nell looked at her. I thought we were talking about repairs. We are, but if repairs become unreasonable, you need options. And Mason? Vanessa's mouth tightened. Mason will leave again. The words came out too quickly. Nell went still. Will he? He always does. That was the first time Vanessa's voice lost its polish. Then she softened again. I don't mean that cruelly. It's just his life. Nell's fingers remained on the paperwork. And the money he sent? Vanessa blinked. Everett looked at her. Just once. A warning. But Nell continued. Those accounts were difficult, weren't they? Vanessa shifted in her chair. Very. I never understood them. No. You did? Vanessa exhaled. Nell, you didn't understand half the financial details. I had to manage those things for you for years. Silence. Everett's head turned slowly. Vanessa realized what she had said. Her expression changed only slightly. But Briar noticed the tension before anyone moved. His head lifted. Nell's hand settled into the fur at his neck. Everett closed the document folder. I think we're done for today. Vanessa looked at him. Everett. No. His voice stayed pleasant. That made it colder. He stood. Nell did not ask them to stay. At the door, Everett looked back toward the ceiling, then at the old windows. This place has survived because people have been lucky. Mason was not there to hear it directly, but the camera was. Everett continued. Luck isn't maintenance. Nell held his gaze. Is that advice? A fact. He buttoned his coat. If you refuse help long enough, this house won't make it through many more winters. Then he left. Vanessa followed. The door closed. Briar stayed standing for nearly a minute. Only when the engine faded did he lie down again. Rehook. That evening, Nell sat beside the living room window while snow began pressing against the glass. Mason had returned before dark. He watched the recorded conversation once, only once. Then he shut the laptop. Nell looked at him. You're angry? No. Mason. He said nothing. Briar rose from the rug. The shepherd walked toward Mason and stopped in front of him. For a moment, Mason expected the dog to lean against his leg. Instead, Briar turned around. He sat with his back pressed firmly against Mason's knees, facing Nell, guarding her from something that was not in the room. Mason looked down. The old dog's ears were forward, still, listening. Nell whispered, almost to herself, He used to do that when you were little. Mason glanced at her. Do what? Sit between you and whatever frightened you. I wasn't frightened. Nell smiled sadly. You were 5. Thunder frightened you. Mason rested one hand on Briar's neck. Outside, wind struck the house. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to remember that protection had once been something given to him too. Then Briar's head snapped toward the basement hall. The tenderness vanished. He stood and listened. Near 2 in the morning, Mason woke to claws moving across the floor. Not frantic, repeated. Briar paced from the foot of the sofa to the lower hallway, then back again. Mason sat up. What? The dog turned, went down the hall, returned. Mason followed. At first he heard nothing unusual. Then he noticed the furnace cycling, starting, stopping, starting again. A faint electrical odor touched the air. Not smoke, hot insulation. Mason's training took over without drama. He woke Nell, moved her to the far side of the house, shut down power to the affected area at the main panel, and called emergency services. No flames appeared. No one was injured. The house cooled rapidly, but portable heat and blankets kept Nell safe while help arrived. Claire came with the responding unit. So did Noah Mercer. Noah was 51, about 5'11", broad through the forearms and shoulders from decades of physical work. His square, clean-shaven face was weathered by wind and outdoor jobs, with a broad nose, pale blue eyes, and short brown-gray hair that never seemed interested in staying combed. He wore a brown canvas work jacket over a dark red flannel shirt, charcoal work pants, a simple tool belt, and heavy brown boots. Noah was not charming. He was useful. He had built his personality around the idea that wires either worked or they did not, and people should aspire to similar honesty. He inspected the exterior heating controls first, then the electrical service. His expression changed. "Who touched this?" Claire looked at him. "You tell me." Noah crouched. "Someone's been in here." "Recently?" "Looks that way." He pointed without allowing Mason closer. A component protecting part of the heating system had been loosened and improperly reseated. Not enough to guarantee a fire, enough to create intermittent failure and overheating. "Could it happen naturally?" Claire asked. "Anything can fail." Noah frowned. "But this?" He shook his head. "I wouldn't call this normal." Then he went quiet. Claire noticed. "What?" Noah stood slowly. "I got a call." "When?" "Couple weeks ago." "From who?" Noah scratched one eyebrow. "Everett Crowell." Mason's entire body went still. Claire immediately looked at him. One warning glance. Mason stayed silent. Noah continued. "Everett said he was evaluating an old property for a client, asked about older heating setups." "What exactly?" Claire asked. "Where outside shutoffs tend to be. How backup heat works. How long a place like this holds temperature if part of the system fails." Claire's face became unreadable. "Did he mention Pine Glass House?" "No." "Why remember it now?" Noah looked toward the damaged component. "Because at the time I thought the questions were strange." He shrugged. "Real estate people ask dumb things. I answer, they pay me, everyone survives." "Did he pay you?" "No, just called." Claire documented everything. She did not accuse Everett. She did not allow Mason to. By dawn, temporary repairs restored heat. Snow covered the yard in fresh, untouched white. Mason stood outside beneath the porch light. His breath came slow, controlled. The road toward town disappeared beyond the trees. He knew where Everett lived. He could have driven there. Every old instinct told him movement was better than waiting. Find the threat, close distance, end uncertainty. Claire stepped onto the porch beside him. For a moment she said nothing. Then, "This is the part where you decide." Mason kept looking at the road. "Decide what?" "Whether you want revenge." She paused. "Or whether you want to win." His jaw tightened. Claire continued. "If you go there now, you give him a story." Mason looked at her. "If you stay, we keep building ours." The wind moved snow across the driveway in thin silver lines. Inside, Nell sat wrapped in a blanket with Briar beside her. Alive, warm, safe. Mason looked once more toward the road. Then he turned away from it. He went back inside. By the end of the week, the investigation no longer looked like a collection of coincidences. It looked like a design. Aurora Pines had awakened beneath one of those brilliant northern mornings that made winter seem almost innocent. Fresh snow rested on the white pines, the sky above Lake Bellwether was a clear, hard blue, and sunlight glittered across the frozen roads. Inside Pine Glass House, Claire Maddox covered Nell's kitchen table with documents. Mason stood at the far end. He did not touch them. He had learned that lesson. Aaron Pike appeared on Claire's laptop through a secure video call, his narrow face more tired than usual. His short black hair showed additional silver beneath the harsh office lighting, and his dark brown eyes carried the focused exhaustion of a man who had spent several nights asking money to explain where it had gone. This time, it had answered. "We followed North Bell services farther," Aaron said. A diagram appeared on the screen. Money from Mason's household support account had reached North Bell in staggered amounts, then moved again. Some went toward expenses associated with Everett, other transfers connected to accounts in Vanessa's name or to cards she had used. The pattern was not accidental, it was organized. Aaron continued. "We also reviewed creation metadata from several property documents obtained through the investigation." Claire slid a printed page toward Mason. Some draft transfer documents had been created or edited on equipment associated with Everett's real estate work. That did not mean every page was fraudulent, but it placed Everett much closer to the machinery behind the attempted transfer. Marge Bell's statement helped establish another piece: Vanessa's repeated involvement with Nell's mail. Noah Mercer's account established another: Everett's unusual questions about Pine Glass House-type heating systems shortly before the malfunction. Then came the road cameras. A municipal traffic camera near Birch Ridge Road had captured Everett's dark pickup traveling toward the northern edge of Aurora Pines late on the night of the heating incident. A private camera mounted outside a feed store recorded the same truck heading back towards town later. Neither image showed Everett touching Pine Glass House. Claire made that point twice. Mason understood why. One piece suggested opportunity, another suggested knowledge, another suggested money, another suggested preparation. None alone told the whole story. Together, they were beginning to speak with the same voice. Mason looked at Claire. "Enough? Enough for what?" "You know what I mean." Claire held his gaze. "Enough to keep moving." It was not the answer he wanted. It was the answer he had learned to accept. His phone rang before he could respond. Vanessa. The room went still. Mason looked at Claire. She nodded once. He answered. "Mason." Vanessa did not sound polished today. "I need to talk to you." "You're talking." "Not over the phone." He waited. "Alone," she added. Mason's expression did not change. "Where?" "The North Star Cafe. Noon." "A public cafe near the town square." Mason agreed. After ending the call, he looked at Claire. "I'm telling you before you tell me I should have told you." For the first time that morning, something almost amused passed through her eyes. Growth. The North Star Cafe sat across from Aurora Pines' old brick library. At noon, sunlight streamed through large front windows and painted warm rectangles across the wooden floor. Retired couples drank coffee near the radiator. Two road workers argued cheerfully over blueberry pie. Nothing about the place felt secret. That was intentional. Mason arrived first. Vanessa came 7 minutes later. She looked different. Her camel wool coat remained immaculate, but the woman inside it did not. Her chestnut hair had been pulled back too quickly. Faint shadows marked the skin beneath her hazel green eyes. She wore no lipstick, and for the first time since Mason had known her, nervousness appeared without being converted into anger. She sat opposite him. "You went to the police." Mason said nothing. "You went to the bank." Still nothing. Vanessa's fingers closed around her coffee cup. "Everett is blaming everything on me." That got Mason's attention. "Everything?" She looked toward the window, then back. "It didn't start the way you think." Mason leaned back. He did not help her. Vanessa swallowed. "After our separation, that support account was still open." "I know. You were sending more money into it than Nell was using. Because it was hers. You were still my husband when some of it started." "Separated. We built a life together." Mason watched her. There it was. Not innocence. Permission she had invented for herself. Vanessa's voice lowered. "I took a little." How little? She ignored the question. I was angry. Mason almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in him. You were angry at me, so you took money from my mother? I told myself it was temporary. Did you put it back? Silence. No. Vanessa looked away. When Everett found out, he said I'd already created a vulnerability. He said if it was going to exist, we should control it properly. Mason's eyes hardened. Control it. He knew how to move things without making them obvious. He knew property. I knew paperwork. And you helped. Her jaw tightened. You weren't there. Mason became very still. Vanessa immediately realized she had chosen the wrong words, but she continued anyway. You were never there, Mason. Every crisis, every anniversary, every time our marriage needed an actual person instead of a transfer or a scheduled call, you had somewhere more important to be. Some of that was true. Perhaps that was why it hurt less than she expected. There had been a time Mason would have defended every deployment, every absence, every decision. Today, he didn't. Our marriage failed, he said. You can blame me for my part. Vanessa's eyes filled. He continued, but my mother wasn't married to you. She looked down. Mason asked quietly, did you know she was cutting her medication? Vanessa's fingers stopped. Did you know there wasn't enough food in the house? No answer. Did you know she was wearing her coat indoors to save heat? Mason, did you ever know she had to choose between medicine and food? Vanessa could not look at him. That was the answer. Something inside Mason changed. Not healed. Changed. For years, a small part of him had still remembered Vanessa as the woman he once loved badly. Now he saw something simpler. A woman had watched an elderly person suffer and decided her own resentment mattered more. Mason stood. I don't need anything else from you. Vanessa looked up sharply. Everett is leaving. Mason stopped. What? He thinks this is collapsing. Where is he going? I don't know. That might have been true. This time Mason did not chase the information himself. He walked outside and called Claire. Rehook. When Mason returned to Pine Glass House that afternoon, Nell was sitting on the floor. For one terrifying second, his heart stopped. Then he saw Briar. The German shepherd was sprawled beside her, perfectly relaxed, while Nell held an old photograph album across her lap. What happened? Nell looked up. To what? You're on the floor. I sat down. People your age aren't supposed to make that look dramatic. People your age aren't supposed to tell their mothers how to sit. Briar thumped his tail once. Mason exhaled. Nell held up a photograph. It showed Mason at perhaps 11 years old, standing in deep snow beside his father. He was laughing at something outside the frame. I forgot you used to laugh with your whole face, Nell said. Mason stared at the photograph. Briar suddenly raised his head and placed one paw over the corner of the album. Nell smiled. See, even he thinks you've become too serious. Mason sat beside them. For a moment there were no bank transfers, no police, no Everett. Only an old picture and an older dog refusing to let the past belong entirely to sorrow. Nell leaned her shoulder against her son. You don't have to win every lost year back. Mason looked at her. You can't. She tapped the photograph. You just have to be here for the next picture. That sentence stayed with him long after Claire called again. Everett had not disappeared yet, but evidence suggested he was preparing to leave Maine. Based on the accumulated financial records, digital evidence, witness statements, and property documents, investigators obtained the appropriate legal authority for further searches and seizures. Mason did not accompany them. That mattered. He stayed with Nell. Later, Claire returned to Pine Glass House. Snow dusted the shoulders of her brown winter jacket. She carried no triumph in her expression, only certainty. They found more. Recovered records and devices expanded the case considerably. There was a copy of Pine Glass House's deed, scans of Nell's signature from legitimate older documents, several unfinished power of attorney forms, correspondence between Everett and representatives connected with the proposed Bellwether Crown Lodge, an estimate calculating the financial value of a direct access corridor across the Rourke property, a spreadsheet tracking the money Mason had transferred, and a folder documenting approximate periods when Mason was deployed or expected to remain away. Nell listened silently. Mason felt anger rising again, but this time it did not control the room. Claire placed another printed image on the table. It was the title of a digital folder. Final transfer, before Rourke returns permanently. Nell stared at it. They planned around him. Claire nodded. That's what it appears to show. Mason looked toward the frozen window. All those years, his absence had not merely been tolerated by Vanessa and Everett. It had been useful. Claire seemed to read the thought. They didn't need your mother to be weak, she said. Mason looked at her. They didn't even need her to be confused. Claire glanced toward Nell. They just needed her to be alone. Briar was lying beside Nell's chair. At the word alone, one ear lifted. Nell reached down and touched his head. But I wasn't. No, Mason said. You weren't. The criminal process did not become cinematic. There was no fist fight, no chase through snowy streets, no Mason dragging Everett from a vehicle. Vanessa and Everett entered legal proceedings based on allegations supported by the investigation, including suspected financial fraud, document-related offenses, exploitation of an elderly person, and conduct connected to attempted property deprivation. The exact charges would be determined by prosecutors from admissible evidence. For Mason, that was enough. Not because he had forgiven them, because justice did not require his hands around anyone's throat. Later that day, Claire explained to Nell that any purported transfer relying on the disputed documents could not simply be used to take Pine Glass House while ownership and authenticity were under active challenge and investigation. Nell listened twice, then asked the question that had apparently been hiding underneath everything else. So they can't just take my house? Mason looked at Briar. The shepherd lay with his muzzle across Nell's boot. Not with those lies, Mason said. Nell nodded, her shoulders lowered, as though she had been carrying the roof herself and someone had finally taken part of its weight. That evening the fire burned steadily. No one discussed Vanessa. No one discussed Everett. Nell sat in her chair beneath an old quilt. Mason sat across from her. Briar stretched between them, sleeping deeply for once. After a long silence, Nell spoke. I'm sorry. Mason looked up. For what? For not calling more. For believing those messages, for letting you think I didn't need you. Mason shook his head. No. I should have asked. And I should have noticed. Nell looked at him. I thought sending money meant I was taking care of you, Mason said. It did. No, it meant I sent money. She understood what he meant. The fire shifted softly. Nell stared into the flames. You can't go back and get those years. Mason swallowed. No. Briar sighed in his sleep. Outside, moonlight spread across the snow. Mason watched his mother for a long moment, then said, But I can stop wasting the ones we have left. Nell reached across the space between their chairs. Mason took her hand. This time, neither of them let go first. By late March, winter had finally begun to loosen its grip on Aurora pines. The snow still lay deep beneath the white pines, packed into blue-shadowed ridges where sunlight rarely reached, but Lake Bellwether had changed. Thin black seams had appeared across the ice near the shoreline, and during the warmest hours of the afternoon, water gathered beneath the trees and ran in narrow silver streams toward the road. Pine Glass House sounded different too. For months it had creaked beneath cold. Now it dripped. Icicles shortened along the eaves. Meltwater tapped rhythmically into the metal gutters. Somewhere beyond the backyard, a chickadee had returned and repeated the same two notes with the confidence of a creature convinced spring had been arranged personally for its benefit. Mason Rourke stood on a ladder beneath the front eave, replacing a weathered strip of trim. At 55, he still moved with the controlled balance of a man whose body had been trained to obey before hesitation could interfere. His broad shoulders filled the fitted, long-sleeved green camouflage shirt he wore beneath the brighter afternoon light, his matching tactical trousers marked with sawdust at one knee. His ash-brown undercut, silver at the temples, had grown only slightly since his return. His clean-shaven, angular face still carried its familiar restraint, but the deep blue-gray eyes seemed less permanently occupied by some distant place. Below him, Briar supervised. The 8-year-old German shepherd sat squarely in the melting snow, his wheat gold and black coat catching the sun. The black saddle across his shoulders remained thick, despite the season beginning to turn, while faint silver around his muzzle made him look less old than distinguished. His amber eyes followed every movement Mason made. "You know," Mason said, "actual help would involve opposable thumbs." Briar yawned. From the porch, Nell called, "He's contributing morale. He's judging my carpentry. He learned from your father." That stopped Mason for half a second. Then he smiled. Pine Glass House had been repaired carefully rather than transformed. A new heating system had replaced the unreliable old one. The worst section of the roof had been reinforced. The cracked windows had been repaired and weather-sealed. No plastic sheets covered the glass anymore. But Mason refused to sand away every imperfection. The old kitchen table remained exactly where it had always been. Small knife marks still scarred one edge from the afternoon when a 13-year-old Mason had tried to carve his initials and stopped midway after hearing his father walk into the room. His father's chair remained beside the window. Even the uneven porch step survived. "It leans," Noah Mercer had complained. "It has character," Nell had replied. "It has rot." Character often does. Noah had lost that argument. The legal case had continued quietly in the background. Some accounts tied to the disputed transfers had been frozen, while investigators and attorneys traced ownership and transactions. Recoverable funds entered the formal restitution process. Documents connected to any attempted transfer of Pine Glass House remained under challenge and investigation and could not simply be used as though nothing had happened. Mason learned not to ask for updates every morning. That was another kind of training. Justice had a pace that offended men accustomed to clocks, missions, and extraction times. But it was moving. That was enough. Nell improved as steadily as the weather. Regular meals returned weight to her face. Her medication stayed on schedule. Color came back into her pale skin. She still wore her old ash-gray coat outdoors, despite Mason offering to replace it 3 separate times. "It's perfectly good. The elbow is more patch than coat." "Then the patch is doing excellent work." Dr. Ruth Calder agreed with Mason about the coat and with Nell about nearly everything else, which meant every medical visit became a small diplomatic crisis. Ruth still arrived in her white coat over the burgundy sweater, short salt and pepper curls framing her warm brown face, reading glasses hanging at her chest. During one checkup, she pointed at Mason without looking away from Nell's blood pressure cuff. "You. Less salt in the soup." Mason frowned. "I'm not the patient." "Then why are you arguing with the doctor?" Nell smiled. "He's been doing that since he was 6. Ruth looked at him. "Some conditions are chronic." Pine Glass House slowly filled with people. Marge Bell arrived one afternoon carrying a blueberry pie she claimed was too ugly to serve respectable guests, which became suspicious when everyone discovered it tasted perfect. Noah came on a Saturday and repaired the old porch lamp without charging Nell. When Mason tried to pay him, Noah stared at the cash. "You want me to insult your mother by charging her after she fed me stew for 20 years? She fed everybody stew." "Exactly." Claire occasionally stopped by after shift. She never stayed long. 1 cup of coffee, 2 if Nell had pie. She and Mason no longer argued every time they spoke, which Nell privately considered proof that both were capable of advanced social development. Aaron Pike refused every invitation to dinner. Then one morning, Nell found a card in the mailbox. No return address beyond his office. Inside, in Aaron's clipped handwriting, were 12 words. "No one is too old to deserve protection from abused trust." Nell read it twice, then placed it on the refrigerator. Mason pretended not to notice. The choice arrived in early April. A private security firm in Virginia offered Mason a senior training position. Excellent salary, good benefits, work he already knew. He left the letter on the kitchen counter too long. Nell found it. "You should take it." Mason looked up from repairing the hinge on a pantry door. "You read my mail now?" "I've learned from professionals." He almost laughed, then saw that she was serious. "Nell." "No." Whenever she called herself Nell instead of accepting Mom, Mason knew she intended to win. You are not staying in Maine because you think I need a guard posted at the kitchen table. I don't. I have survived 72 years, one bad heating system, one criminal scheme, and your cooking. That last one seems unnecessarily personal. It was evidence. She folded the letter. Go if that's the life you want. Mason looked through the window toward Briar sleeping in a patch of sun. What if it isn't? Nell became quiet. For years, Mason had moved from one assignment to another because movement gave shape to his life. There was always somewhere else he was needed, someone else in danger, another problem waiting to become his responsibility. Standing still had once felt dangerously close to uselessness. Now he understood something he had never learned in uniform. Purpose did not require distance. A month later, Mason accepted a regional position, helping train search and rescue volunteers and supporting wilderness recovery operations across northern Maine. Less money, more snow, and Pineglass House remained home. Rehook, the idea for what came next, belonged to Nell. It began with an empty bowl. One afternoon, Mason found her sitting at the old table with Briar beside her and a chipped white soup bowl in front of them. There was nothing in it. What are you doing? Remembering. He pulled out a chair. Nell touched the rim of the bowl. The day you found me outside Copper Lantern. Mason's expression changed. She shook her head. I'm not talking about Hank. Then she looked toward the window. I wasn't most ashamed because I was hungry. Mason waited. I was ashamed because I felt there was nowhere I could walk into without apologizing first. Her fingers rested lightly against the bowl. For the coat, for the dog, for being old, for not having enough. Briar pushed his muzzle beneath her hand. Nell smiled down at him, then looked back at Mason. What if nobody had to apologize here? The question remained in the room after she stopped speaking. Mason glanced toward the unused outbuilding beyond the kitchen window. And suddenly, the old shed no longer looked like storage. It looked like a door. By early May, the shed had become something new. They called it the open door at Pineglass. Mason reinforced the floor and insulated the walls. Noah rewired the lights. Marge bullied 3 local businesses into donating chairs by describing the request as voluntary, unless you want me remembering things. Ruth arranged a small shelf of community health information. Claire contributed nothing officially and somehow still appeared one Saturday carrying 2 boxes of donated mugs. The room remained simple. Long wooden tables, a coffee urn, a stove for soup, books, a chessboard, a basket of dog treats near the entrance. On cold days, older residents could come in for a meal. Veterans who lived alone began stopping by. People brought extra bread. Restaurants donated food that otherwise would have been discarded. Nobody checked coats, nobody checked bank accounts, and dogs were welcome. Briar became the unofficial director. He spent most mornings beside the entrance, accepting affection from elderly visitors with grave dignity. Children fascinated him. Food fascinated him more. Every grocery bag received a full inspection. Mason told people Briar had promoted himself to customs enforcement. Nobody questioned it. Then Hank Dillard appeared. It happened on a bright morning after the last serious snow had melted from the road. Hank stood at the end of the porch carrying 2 metal soup pots. He looked smaller without Copper Lantern around him. Still heavy through the middle, still wearing the same red and black flannel beneath his canvas apron, though his broad face seemed less flushed than Mason remembered. For weeks, Hank's business had suffered after people learned what had happened outside the restaurant. Some consequences arrived through courts. Others arrived through empty tables. Hank stood there for almost a minute. Mason said nothing. Nell opened the door. Hank looked at her. I behaved badly. Nell glanced at the soup. Hank swallowed. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. His face fell slightly. Nell pointed at the pots. Are you planning to apologize all morning, or are you going to let those get cold? Hank blinked. What? Bring them inside. He looked at Mason. Mason stepped aside. No speech followed. No dramatic absolution. Hank carried the soup into the open door. The next week, he brought bread. That was enough for a beginning. On one of the last cool afternoons before spring fully claimed Aurora Pines, Mason walked with Nell along the edge of Lake Bellwether. The ice had pulled back from shore. Dark water moved beneath the sunlight. Nell walked slowly, one hand occasionally resting on Mason's arm. Months earlier, that pace would have made him unconsciously impatient. Now he matched it without thinking. Briar trotted several yards ahead. His old legs were still strong. He stopped near the curve of the trail, turned, waited. Amber eyes fixed on Mason. Mason recognized the look. Not magic, not prophecy, just patience. The same patience that had stayed beside Nell when he could not. The same animal who had known fear without understanding paperwork, known absence without understanding war, and known family without ever needing the word explained. "We're coming, old boy." Briar remained where he was. Nell slipped her arm through Mason's. Their shadows stretched long behind them across the remaining snow. Through the trees, Pine Glass House could just be seen. The repaired porch, the old windows, and beside the door, Noah's restored lamp glowing softly in the approaching evening. Once that light had waited for Mason. Now it welcomed him. There were things money could return: medication, heat, a repaired roof. There were things justice might partially restore: stolen savings, a name cleared, a home protected. But some losses belonged to time: a phone call never made, a Christmas spent alone, a mother believing she had become a burden, a son mistaking a bank transfer for presents. Those years would never return. But love was strange that way. It did not always ask to be repaid. Sometimes it only asked whether someone would come back, whether someone would tell the truth, whether someone would choose not to leave again. And sometimes, if a family had been very fortunate, an old German shepherd remembered the road long enough for everyone else to find it too. Sometimes, the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder, flashing light, or a voice from heaven. Sometimes they arrive quietly. They arrive as an old dog who remembers a scent after years have passed, as a mother who keeps a porch light burning even when she believes her son may never truly come home, as a man who finally discovers that protecting the people he loves is not only about money, strength, or sacrifice, but about being present while there is still time. Mason believed he had been caring for his mother because he never stopped sending money. Nell believed she was loving her son by hiding her suffering so she would not become another burden on his shoulders. Both acted out of love, and yet silence built a distance between them that someone else was able to exploit. That is one of the lessons this story leaves behind. Love should not always be assumed. Sometimes it needs to be spoken. Sometimes it needs a phone call. Sometimes it needs a visit. Sometimes it simply needs someone to sit at the kitchen table and ask, "Are you really okay?" Because there may be someone in your own life who keeps saying they are fine because they do not want to trouble you. A parent, a grandparent, an old friend, a neighbor who has become quieter with age. Do not wait for a crisis to remind you how much they matter. Call them, visit them, listen a little longer than usual. Look beyond the words, "I'm fine." And perhaps there was another lesson hidden inside Briar. A dog could not understand bank accounts, property deeds, betrayal, or justice. Briar did not know why Mason had been gone or why Nell sometimes sat alone beside a weak fire. He only knew who belonged to his family. He knew when Nell was afraid. He remembered the man who had once placed a hand on his head and trusted him to watch over her. And when that man finally came home, Briar remembered him. Some people may call that instinct. Some may call it loyalty. And some may believe that God has mysterious ways of placing the right creature beside us when our own strength is no longer enough. Perhaps miracles are not always the impossible happening. Perhaps sometimes a miracle is simply something good remaining faithful long enough for us to find our way back to it. A dog waiting, a mother forgiving, a son returning, a door opening again. God does not always remove every winter from our lives. Sometimes He gives us someone willing to walk through the winter beside us. So if this story reminded you of someone you love, do not keep that feeling to yourself. Share this story with someone who may need the reminder. And in the comments, tell us about the person, the dog, or the unexpected moment that once helped guide you home when life became difficult. If stories about loyalty, faith, second chances, and the extraordinary bond between people and animals mean something to you, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next journey. May God watch over your home, protect the people you love, comfort those who are lonely, give strength to those carrying burdens in silence, and bless every faithful animal that stays beside us through the storms we cannot face alone. And wherever you are watching from tonight, may you always have a light worth coming home to.